Welcome back to the Waves of Change podcast. This is episode 1 called Things We Lost to the Water. We are your hosts, Olivia,
James,
and Diana, and in this episode we will be talking about a 2001 novel that captures lots of different immigrant struggles of Vietnamese Americans, specifically in the New Orleans region.
The story mainly revolves around Huang, an immigrant mother, followed by her 2 sons, Tuan and Ben, later Ben, as well as the culture shock of moving and adapting to a new country.
First, let's hop on the topic of relationship between identity and power in this story, demonstrated mainly through Tuan, Ben, and Huan, who are main characters of the story. Huan, who is a mother, loses her power by her 2 sons moving away from their Vietnamese roots once coming to America, which is obviously extremely difficult as a mom and as an immigrant. Throughout the novel, Tuan, who is the oldest son, finds a sense of false power when joining a gang, which makes him lose his sense of identity. Ben, who is the youngest son, is also trying to explore his identity by acknowledging and discovering his sexuality, which is when he finds out that he is attracted to men, while exploring more of his power in life. Eventually, when Ben moves to France, in a way, he is leaving his old part of his life behind, but at the same time, I think he's gaining a sense of power by being able to do what he has always wanted to do, which is later to become a big-time author. Near the end of the novel, when Hung is stuck in a hurricane, she is being reminded of the identity that she had found when coming to America, as well as leaving a piece of her power behind, in the perspective of a mother who wants over her sons and to be able to represent the transition she's making as an American woman. In the book, the author Nguyen demonstrates that power and identity can restrict but also strengthen a person. At the end, real power over yourself can come from accepting who you are through self-understanding.
In the middle chapters, Nguyen goes into depth about how Vietnamese culture and the traumatic history of war and displacement shaped the majority of identities of refugees in America. The novel centers on Huang and her sons who flee Vietnam after the war and settle in New Orleans, where they must reconcile their past memories with the demands of a new culture. I feel like for Huang, keeping up with those kinds of Vietnamese traditions, such as speaking the language and cooking familiar dishes, is her way to preserve her sense of self and connection to her homeland.
However, her sons, especially Ben, grow up caught between the push of maintaining those traditions and struggles, growing up in America as a child of immigration, struggling to define their identities through the pressure of assimilation. This generational conflict shows how history influences identity differently depending on one's proximity to it. Nguyen ultimately shows that culture and memory act as anchors for displaced communities, providing continuity even as they evolved within a foreign environment. The novel points out that collective identity is not fixed, but built through ongoing balance between remembrance and adaptation, yet addressing things lost to the water. Now, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
Are you tired of having water with enhanced vitamins and minerals?
Yes, I don't want to be putting unnecessary things in my body.
Do you want free water that isn't overpriced and without a threat of microplastics?
Duh, obviously.
Invest in free water, the purest form of spring water that money can buy, shipped in our most versatile aluminum bottles. Free water retains its purity from spring to the palm of your hand. Get your free water now for only $0.00.
Plenty of thanks to our sponsor. Now back to the novel. An extremely large topic of the book is the view and outlook of immigrant families, specifically. And it's good to note that Nguyen wrote this book from the perspective of the 1980s through the early 2000s. What are some similarities and differences that immigrants face as far as coming to America and adapting to its culture today?
Well, immigrants who have arrived here in the past and those who recently have arrived face many of the same challenges. As far as coming to America, a challenge any immigrant can face is a language barrier. Although America does not have an official language, struggling with the language may cause some challenges for those who know very little to no English. A difference is the way they can communicate with their families back home. Nowadays, technology has advanced, making communication easier and more accessible for anyone.
I definitely agree with what you said about having to come to America and having the language barriers make things extremely more difficult. On another note, during the book, Huang and her family are now just getting used to the change from Vietnam to New Orleans. They know that they will never be treated like they belong, but they still feel the hurt. In a store that Toon is in, he is looking around for his name on a license plate, but there are only white names. Toon did not see this, Nguyen said on page 131, even though the store manager assumes his name is Tommy, which is obviously not. This goes to show the cultural invisibility and how since his name is not American, it's not going to be represented.
No, yeah, I totally see how there's a lack of Vietnamese representation there. In another perspective, chapter Ben 1992 demonstrates Ben's quiet yet transformative encounter with freedom and a sense of self-recognition through his relationship with Howie. When referring to Ben's perspective, Nguyen writes that Howie had a beautiful body, and Ben wanted to say it aloud, beautiful. Nguyen does a great job in conveying Ben's internal struggle to a silent desire and showing how situating beauty as both a revelation and a restraint. His language also contrasts with the emotional weight of the moment, showing how the unspoken becomes a language of its own. Later, Ben describes there was a strange serenity to it. The tone shifts from hesitation to acceptance, capturing peace that defies the turbulence of his divided identity. The final picture, they were both stars, two of them, floating, free, on page 153, transforms intimacy into greatness in a way, visualizing the two boys in weightless space, momentarily unbound by culture, expectation, or fear. Through this plethora of imagery, Nguyen illuminates how love and desire become acts of resistance against silence, and how beauty, serenity, and freedom tied to offer Ben a fleeting yet heartfelt glimpse of who he might become.
Those quotes are very deep in a way, with how the author talks about the sons. Huang, the mother, already feels so much pressure on herself trying to make a good living for her kids and her while trying to keep her son safe and stay out of any possible trouble before they head out. If something were to happen, I don't know. It's my job to keep them out of trouble, to make sure they become good people. Page 126. Huang wants what's best for her sons to be good people, but they don't comply with that, and both of her sons get into trouble. While Tuan associates himself with the New Orleans Vietnamese gang, Ben continues to struggle more with his self-identity.
Changing to talking more about power, along with demonstrating the struggles and hardships of immigrant families, this novel also shows the contrast in power between Americans, particularly in the New Orleans region. Nguyen often describes the negative view of foreign peoples in plenty of scenarios with Toon and Huang. Throughout the book, Nguyen reminds us that power isn't always obvious. It's not just about who's in charge, it's about the systems and expectations that quietly shape people's lives. For this, family power shows up in laws, in poverty, in social norms, and even in relationships with each other. In its entirety, Things We Lost to the Water shows how surviving in America means constantly negotiating with these systems of power. But it also shows resilience, how love, memory, and community help them push back against those forces and create their own kind of strength. The story follows Huang, a mother who escapes Vietnam with her two sons, Toon and Bean, and it settles in New Orleans. At first, it seems like the book is just about family and culture, but as you read more deeply, you realize that it's about survival within systems that hold power over people. Systems such as immigration, racism, class, and even culture itself. One of the strongest systems of power in the novel is immigration. From the very beginning, Huang's life in America is defined by her refugee status. She depends on the government for housing and paperwork, but she also fears it. There's a constant fear of being watched and of having to prove that she belongs. The language barrier also makes things worse. She can't fully communicate, which takes away her control and voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Through her, Nguyen shows how power isn't just about who's in charge. It's built into the systems that make some people's lives easier and others' lives much harder. Even in small things like getting a job or filling out forms become reminders that she doesn't have the same freedom as others. Then there's race and class. The family ends up living in a poor neighborhood in New Orleans, a place that's already struggling with poverty and inequality. Huang and her sons don't just face the challenges of being immigrants, they also have to deal with the racism and class divides that exist in America. Their neighbors are mostly black, and Win doesn't shy away from showing the tensions and similarities between marginalized groups. Both are fighting for space, respect, and safety in a country that overlooks them. Tuan, the older son, gets pulled into a gang, which is another kind of power system. For him, the gang becomes a substitute family in a way, a place where he feels accepted when the rest of the world sees him as different. But the gang also traps him in a cycle of violence and control. Win uses Tuan's story to show how people who grow up without social power often end up finding belonging in spaces that seem empowering, but are actually built on the same structures of control and inequality. On the other hand, Ben, who later calls himself Ben, deals with a different kind of power, cultural and personal identity. He wants to fit in, to blend into American life, and that sometimes means letting go of his Vietnamese roots.
However, his struggle represents the power of assimilation, the invisible force that pressures people to conform in order to be accepted. Huang wants her sons to remember where they came from, but America pushes them to forget. This cultural tension is its own kind of power struggle between memory and erasure, between who they are and who the world wants them to be. And then there's Hurricane Katrina, which comes near the end of the novel. The storm itself becomes a symbol of uncontrollable power, the kind that destroys everything in its path, no matter how hard you work to build something stable. It mirrors the forces in the story, the government's failure to protect people, the vulnerability of immigrants, and how nature itself can become another system that decides who gets to survive and who doesn't. The thing that is so powerful about Nguyen's writing is that he never makes these systems feel abstract. They show up in small moments, in silence, in miscommunication, and in the spaces between family members. The characters aren't just victims. They find ways to adapt, resist, and rebuild. Even when they are separated or struggling, there's a sense of quiet resilience that runs through the story. In the end, Things We Lost to the Water shows that power doesn't always look like someone holding authority. It often hides in laws and traditions, in money, and in history. For Huang and her sons, living in America means constantly negotiating with these forces while trying to hold on to who they are. But it's also a story about strength, how family, memory, and love can give people the power to survive even when the world is built against them. Wow, that was a lot to unpack. Now let's take our last commercial break.
Hey, are you tired of squinting in the sun?
Yes.
Get yourself a pair of Wave Shade sunglasses.
How are they though?
They're sleek, comfortable, and block out 100% of harmful UV rays.
Wow.
Whether you're at the beach, driving, or just hanging out, you'll look good and see even better. Style, comfort, and protection all in one. Wave Shade sunglasses. See the world in a better wave.
Big thanks to another one of our sponsors, Wave Shade Sunglasses. Anyways, I could talk about this novel for hours.
Me too.
But unfortunately, that is all the time we have today.
Thanks for listening to episode 1 of Things We Lost to the Water. Tune in next time on Waves of Change. You can stay up to date by following us on Instagram at Waves of Change. Until next time.